Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan, and it's not Spawn year. It's day 41 of my comic review video day calendar. And today I'm going to go to a character that I've never been a giant fan of and don't own very much of, but kind of like the Ghost Rider issue that I did recently. This is another early 90s Marvel comic that I don't know why I have, and I don't remember buying or intentionally keeping out of a collection or big lot before I sold it, so I thought I would crack this open and take a look. Unlike that Ghost Rider issue, I was a lot more at home here and not at all confused about the mythology or any of the history of anything going on. This is fairly straightforward, and it didn't go to a lot of material that I'm not already familiar with. It also helps that it's a tie-in to a series, to a event that I like a lot and care a lot about, and this is a thing that I could see intentionally collecting. I don't think that's the reason I hung on to this. I don't remember this at all, but this is Incredible Hulk number 384, which is a tie-in to Infinity Guantlet, and that might be a cool thing to try to do down the road. Start collecting, I don't even know how many there are, but any single issue tie-in from another run of comics from Infinity Guantlet. So that's part of the reason I went ahead and picked this up, or went ahead and read this, I should say, because I was kind of curious about it. This is written by Peter David, and this is fairly early in Peter David's run. When I first looked at this, it didn't even occur to me that this was part of that run, and then I cracked it open and went, oh yeah, that's right, I forgot. Peter David is on this book longer than Walt Simonson is on Thor. He has a 12-issue run, and he starts in 87, so this is only 4 years into his run, and this is the second artist that works with Peter David, and maybe the most beloved. This is drawn by Dale Keown, and that's not a name that I had heard before because I have not read this seminal run. I need to. This is kind of a odd, jokey issue of this run. I'm sure this isn't super indicative of the rest of it. Not that it's bad or anything. It's just tonally, it was a little bit different than I expected. I got almost She-Hulk vibes from it. Not the TV show, which I still haven't watched, by the way, but it seemed like more of a comedy comic than I expected, which makes me wonder what the levity is like in the rest of it, and even a little bit more melodramatic than I might have expected. But Dale Keown, I read, is mostly known for Hulk, and in fact did a lot of merchandise work, did the drawings for a lot of the merchandise for the 2003 Hulk movie, and he also drew The Darkness. He has very little credits outside of Marvel and Image, and he did maybe, I read one Superman issue for DC. That's like his only DC credit. But anyway, I will break this down very quickly. This is a real simple issue, and in fact, Peter David kind of makes fun of that fact when he calls this small talk, and listed at the bottom as a little tale from Peter David and Dale Keown, Mark Farmer, the inker, etc. So a little bit of play on words, because as you can tell from this page, there's a giant rat that is attacking the Hulk, and it is in fact not the rat that's giant, although that's still probably a pretty sizable rat, but it is the Hulk who has become tiny. So kind of turning things on their head, flipping the script a little bit. Hulk is used to being gigantic, and now he's the one who is tiny and has to deal with a with a world that is larger than him and is oppressing him. And from the cover, I really expected, like I'm sure was intended, to have a huge Abomination and not a tiny Hulk. And because I'm not real familiar with Hulk, when I think of Abomination, I think of him as a like kaiju-sized, Power Ranger monster-sized character, because that's what happens to him at the end of Incredible Hulk. And even in the 2003 Hulk movie, you had kind of a huge monster that I wasn't sure if that was supposed to be Abomination or not when I first saw that movie. But when I think of, and of course that's not Blonsky, but when I first, saw that movie, I thought that's who that was supposed to be. So anyway, I think of the 2008 movie Abomination, and I was like, oh, okay, he's going to be massive in this, like he was there, and that is not what's happening. So kind of subverted expectations. That's sort of fun, and this seems like a kind of typical thing to do in really genre fiction in general, but in comics, like you're kind of rolling a d20 and coming up with whatever weird high concept thing that we haven't done in this yet, but you've probably seen, in a bunch of other things. So the Hulk could have been, cloned or had some kind of crazy copy, or he could be going through a causality loop, or he could have amnesia, or, the kind of the TV episode thing. And in this episode, our hero or heroes get super tiny and have to deal with that. It's like the DS9 episode, One Little Ship. And so we have that old chestnut here. Again, it's kind of fun to do it with the Hulk for obvious reasons. And I really like the artwork in this issue. I feel like this is kind of early 90s house style Marvel, which is fine by me. That's one of the reasons that I felt kind of at home reading this. It falls in line really well with what Infinity Gauntlet looks like. I think that there's a little bit of George Perez in this art, but it doesn't feel like he's aping George Perez. It just seems like both of those guys have some similar sensibilities. I really like the overlapping characters into panels, but mostly, well, I was going to say simple panel layouts. They're pretty varied as well, and it just seems like a blend of a lot of things I like. Like his women look a lot like McFarlane women, and then particularly. Let me find a good page. Yeah, like here with these faces, it's kind of like the way McFarlane draws women, except not as exaggerated in girlish figure and stuff, and not as many lines on the face. And then there's even maybe a little bit of Bagley in it as well. But I like how expressive his Blonsky is. He's got a real tragic monster that is sad because his wife sees him as a monster, doesn't understand that he is in fact Blonsky, and is trying to figure out a way to bring himself to tell his wife that he is not dead, but is in fact, but has been transformed into this monstrous creature. It's kind of convenient. So it's real soap opera, and it's kind of convenient that the Hulk winds up in New York. This is, by the way, right after the Thanos snap. Of course, years before it would be like a huge cultural phenomenon and a big meme thing with Infinity War in the movie. In Infinity Gauntlet, that happens very early and is not a huge cliffhanger right in the middle like it is with the Avengers story. And it's kind of weird how light and airy this story is, despite the personal tragedy with our villain and the Hulk. Relating to that, we've got kind of a character parallel between the two. That's all. I'll just get this out of the way now. That's all about people judging books by their covers and not looking at inner beauty, but assuming, as Blonsky or as Hulk says, actually, that the outer image of a person is a reflection of who they are inside, and both of them are kind of struggling with that and trying to decide if they are in fact monsters because of the mistakes they've made that have turned them into what they are, and just because that's what they are now. So when other people perceive you that way long enough, you start to see yourself that way a little bit as well. The man versus monster theme with Hulk has never resonated with me as much as the animal human thing with Wolverine for whatever reason. And these are, and I think it's handled really well here. This is a classic Hulk story. This is another one of those issues. We've read a few of these this year, like with that Claremont Wolverine issue that I did from the late 90s, where it feels like a really good encapsulation of what these stories are usually about and who the Hulk is as a person. So if this was your first introduction to this character, it'd be a weird place to start, of course, but it's a good proof of concept for what this is all about. It's got the moodiness of the TV show Hulk and any good classic Hulk comics I've ever happened to read. You gotta have walking around sad in the rain in your Hulk comic. And I don't know how indicative this issue is of the rest of the Peter David run. I can't remember if I mentioned this earlier, but it reminds me a little bit of She-Hulk, not the show. I haven't seen that, but I had that thought earlier, and I just can't remember if I actually mentioned that in this video. So my apologies if I'm repeating myself. But anyway, that is the kind of internal conflict going on with Blonsky. The story is kind of more about him than it is Hulk. Like, Hulk kind of helps him, even though usually they're at odds with each other, usually they're fighting. It kind of, the Hulk kind of helps him to see things from his wife's perspective and see the potential impossible situation that she's in, and that he can't, the human condition is unfortunate, it's sad. She may never see you as the person you were before and respect you as a man, because she may just not have that in her. That may just be the way we're all built, and that's unfortunate, and it's up to you if you want to try to pursue a relationship with her, but keep in mind, she thinks that you're dead, and you did kidnap her and take her into a sewer, and she's maybe never going to love you the way she did before. We don't really see what exactly happens at the end of this with the two of them, I don't think. I think the implication, she kind of turns away, and I think the implication is it's probably not going to work out between them, which is not surprising at all. I meant to say this a minute ago. Kind of convenient that the Hulk just happens to wind up when he's in New York in the sewer with his arch nemesis, or one of his big villains. Like, the first thing he sees is giant rats, and then the first person he meets is a Hulk character, like a major Hulk character. Okay, that seems kind of easy, and kind of weird that he doesn't say anything about that. Like, oh, that's really strange. How is this the first person that I'm running into? But the Hulk, when the Thanos snap happened, he disappears and becomes tiny. And I don't remember if that's actually in Infinity Gauntlet that he gets small, or if that's something that Peter David came up with for this to kind of have a fun interlude issue like this. This stands alone really well by itself. You don't really have to know anything about Infinity Gauntlet in order to appreciate this. We get not really recapping, but just kind of a connective tissue page at the beginning to go, there's big, crazy cosmic stuff going on, and we've sort of shattered the universe of heroes with Thanos and the snap and everything, and characters are disappearing, and some of them are winding up in different random places, and the Hulk is a tiny person now. Super tiny, minuscule, but not subatomic. Which is why it's a little bit weird that when he is standing on the Abomination's shoulder and pretending like he's the voice of God, which is kind of fun. Peter David gets some good comedy mileage out of that. He's not so small that the Abomination shouldn't be able to tell that it's not God's voice in his head, but in fact a person who is yelling into one ear. Like, if it were me, I'd be like, oh, there's a couple of panels where the Hulk is standing behind him, and maybe I buy it a little bit more. This might sound like a nitpick, but it took me out a little bit, where you'd think you'd be able to tell that there's a voice actually literally in one ear and not the other. Like the fact that it's not in stereo at the very least, you're like, oh, there's this mono voice that's in my left ear and it's claiming it's God, but it's not in my head or coming in the other ear. So you'd think that he'd just start like brushing his shoulder off and like trying to figure out what exactly it is that's in his ear. So that's a little bit odd. And then there is a little subplot where Betty Banner is trying to get a job working for a helpline that's kind of like a suicide hotline, but they specialize in, or they, I guess the point is they don't specialize. They're kind of a catch-all line that's supposed to be able to solve practically any problem for you possible. And I of course, not reading the previous issue, I don't know why she's so desperate to get this particular job. I feel like, I can't quite put my finger on this, just having just read this. I feel like there's maybe supposed to be a thematic parallel between the Blonsky thing and what she's going through. This idea that any problem at all is solvable. And the Hulk's point with Blonsky is, with people like us, it's not true. Unfortunately, some problems can't be solved, and some people can't be more than the sum of their parts, and see things in a more enlightened kind of way. Maybe I'm reading too far into that, but that was the closest to a connection between these two things as I could come up with. And there's this kind of amusing joke where I don't fully get this whole thing where Betty goes to, again, this hotline. She really wants this job, and the person running it isn't immediately interested in her as a candidate for the job, and she seems a little desperate, Betty does, and then Betty gives this kind of impassioned speech about how much she cares about people and how good she'd be at this phone job, and it seems like the kind of thing that you'd be a volunteer for, but I guess they're getting paid, and I'm not totally sure. And then out of nowhere, the woman says, oh, you know what, you're hired. And I wasn't really sure what the impetus was for that. I don't know if the deal was that like they've suddenly gotten a lot of calls because this is just after the Thanos snap and a lot of people are disappearing. You'd think things would be more chaotic than they are even here. But I don't know if that has anything to do with what causes that. And then Betty ends up sitting across from a woman named Veronica, which Peter David clearly thinks is infinitely funny. And I like the way it plays okay, I guess. It was a really odd choice, but the idea, of course, is they're Archie characters. Her name is Betty. This girl that sits next to her's name is Veronica. And they just look at each other, and Betty says, I won't say anything about this if you won't, and the other one says, deal, and that's the end of that. So it's Betty and Veronica. Get it? And like I said, I like the execution of it more than I like the joke, but it's so odd after this, like, massive catastrophe and tragedy happens to the world. With imagine that if we did this in the MCU, where you've got the Thanos snap, and the very next thing you do is this weird, silly comedy episode or movie or something about one of the superheroes getting tiny because of the Thanos snap, and you throw in a lot of silly jokes like that and play it real melodramatic. But it's an entertaining issue, certainly. It just seemed like some of it, some sort of odd choices. This is another one of those things, like I'm a broken record, that I need to finally read all of at some point. And this didn't have me, chomping at the bit or anything to finally sit down and read all of Peter David's Hulk, but I certainly was entertained by it, but I'm skeptical about how indicative this is of the rest of the run. Anyway, that's going to do it for me today. Thanks a lot for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you again tomorrow with another comic review. I was Captain Logan, and happy reading.